What's up, YouTube? KS Gun Guy here. Thanks for joining me today as always. So I've got the final episode of the If I Could Only Have One series for 2017, and it's a special one. I've got two Goliath compact polymer striker-fired firearms in front of us, and if you've been watching the channel for a while, I did a comparison between the CZ-P10C and the M&P 2.0 compact, another If I Could Only Have One, and the CZ-1, but only by a little bit. During the course of that testing, I actually took both of those plus the Glock 19 Gen 5 with me over the course of 2 days off camera, just so I could kind of do my thing and not worry about being filmed, and shot shot the heck out of all of these guns here, and really just kind of tried to gather as much data as I could. So this is the final continuation of that particular series, so I'm excited to do this and present this with you. Now, of course, if you're a fan of the series, you know that I compare two guns, whether very similar or in some cases very different, and I bring in things like stats, features. Of course, we'll be wheeling and shooting along the way. We'll take a look at the triggers, although this one will be a little different, and I will announce a winner at the end. But as you know, both of these guns are fantastic. If you're interested in either one, if you own either or both of them, you're doing great. So it's not to say that one is better than the other. However, it's a great opportunity for me to take a step back and challenge myself, but also perhaps challenge you to say, if I could only have one, which one would it be? So again, there will be a winner. So again, we've got the Glock 19 Gen 5 here. It is unloaded with an unloaded magazine in it. And the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Compact, again with an empty magazine. Now, both of these are new to the market, at least in these iterations, although the Glock 19 has been around for quite some time. It's in its 5th generation now. So this will be an interesting comparison for sure. So from a stats standpoint, the overall length of the Glock is 7.28 inches versus 7.3 inches. The height is 5.04 inches versus 5 inches. The barrel length is 4.02 inches versus 4 inches. So we really are neck and neck at this point in time. Now, from a width standpoint, the Glock is 1.34 inches versus 1.29 inches. The weight unloaded is 24 ounces versus 26.6 ounces. That's probably the most glaring difference between the two, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go along. From a magazine capacity standpoint, both of these are 15-round magazines. Now, the Glock comes with 3. They are a polymer shell with a steel insert. So you know, it's nice that they come with 3 magazines, of course. And there's also compatibility with larger magazines as well. Your 17-round and your 33-round magazines will work with the Glock 19. The M&P 2.0 does have the steel 15-round magazines. Mine came with 2, but there are always some sort of sales or rebates going on. In fact, I got 2 extra magazines with this, with a rebate a month and a half later, but still got a couple of extra magazines. And they do come with a couple of little polymer inserts in them. I've got one right here. So you can actually take a 17-round magazine and you can put this insert in so it extends that grip on the 2.0 compact. So it's kind of nice that they did that. I really said kudos to Smith on my original video with this particular gun. Now, of course, they're both striker-fired firearms, and again, we'll talk about the triggers a little bit later on because neither one are stock. From a safety standpoint, both of them depend on safety levers or hinged design on the M&P original trigger from a safety standpoint, and then, of course, internal safeties. However, the M&Ps do have a safety model, so you can get a thumb safety if that's important to you or your state requires it. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the features here for just a little while. This is not a deep dive into either one, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the specs on both of these guns, or the features rather. But some of the more outstanding features. Now, from a grip texture standpoint, the Gen 5 carries forward the Gen 4 grip texture. Of course, I'll give you a look at that. We've got our squares there on the side, and then we've got our little kind of pyramids on the back and the front straps. You may or may not be able to see that very well. And I've always said the Gen 4, Gen 5 grip texture is really nice. I actually prefer it to earlier generations, with the exception of the RTF texture. That's a story for another day. But the grip texture, I think, does just fine. Now, it does have back straps that you can put on this. It does come with the gun. So you've got a little bit of flexibility from a grip standpoint. Now, they did remove the finger grooves for the Gen 5, and with the 19, for me, at least for my hands, it didn't matter one way or the other. It was a bigger deal on the Glock 17, but a lot of people have praised Glock for going back to earlier generations with those no finger grooves. Now, one unusual thing that Glock did with this, because they put a flared magwell, you'll be able to see that flared magwell there, they actually had to put a little recess right here in front of the grip. So there's a cutout there, and people have by and large panned that add-on because you can feel it when you're shooting a little bit. It's not bad. It doesn't really get in the way, but you can definitely notice it. But they did that to be able to strip magazines out just a little bit easier. Now, conventionally, we would strip magazines out on the side, but Glock has told us that perhaps this is better. I disagree with that, but at least you can still yank magazines out one way or the other. The magazine release is still the Gen 4 magazine release, and I like it. It's a little bit bigger. It's easy to get to. There's no problem. It's not ambidextrous out of the box. However, you can swap it. And then the slide lock slide release, once again, it is now ambidextrous on the Gen 5. So this is another recent addition to Glocks. And by and large, people have praised that. They're glad that it's ambidextrous out of the box. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm right-handed, but I totally understand that ambidextrous feature on there for sure. It does have your accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, as you would expect. And they did do a little bit more of an undercut here under the trigger guard, although it's extraordinarily slight. You can barely notice it. So some people are saying they still get that Glock knuckle with that finger right there. It's never really bothered me very much, but some people have noted that. So from a frame standpoint on the M&P 2.0, one of the biggest things about the M&P is going to be its grip texture. It is certainly more aggressive than the previous generation of M&P full-size guns, so a bit more aggressive. Now it does have interchangeable back straps. You get 4 with this versus 3. Or actually, I think you get 4 on the Glock as well. But again, some nice flexibility with that grip one way or the other. I like this grip texture. This works well. Now I feel like it's a little bit more subtle than the full size. The full size I thought was just a little bit too harsh. That might be me, it might be a mental thing, but I have heard some others comment that this is more subtle as well. So I think perhaps maybe they tapered it off a little bit. It's still a consideration from a carry standpoint. Some people say that this can kind of rub your skin and irritate you a little bit. I haven't found that to be the case. I've carried this on quite a few occasions, and it hasn't bothered me, hasn't torn up clothes or my skin as of yet. Now, from a magazine retrieval standpoint, or ripping out a magazine during malfunction, you'll see there are some little grooves right there, and it's actually on both sides. So you can tear out a magazine in the case of a malfunction, and it's a little bit more natural because it's on the sides rather than on the front. The magazine release is now steel, but it's still the same type of magazine release they had on the version 1 M&Ps. Again, not ambidextrous, but you can swap it out, so you can reverse it if you need to. I really like the M&P magazine release. I think it's in the right place and it feels good, so I'm glad they carried that forward. Whether they made it steel or not, I'm impartial on that, but again, it's nice. It's a nice place for it for sure. And then you've got your accessory rail for your lights, lasers, grenade launchers, as you would expect. Now, one thing you'll notice, there are a couple of little windows there in the front of the frame. They've extended these steel inserts, so it makes that polymer just a little bit more rigid versus the previous generation. So it's really nice when shooting. I think you can notice it a little bit. It just makes it a little bit more of a solid shooter. Now, slide lock, slide release, once again, ambidextrous out of the box. Some people have said that the right side's not quite as easy to actuate. I haven't found that to be the case. I think it works reasonably well, and so does the left side. So it's nice that it's got that ambidextrous quality to it. From a takedown standpoint, I don't take down firearms in these particular videos, but we've got our takedown tabs, your standard Glock operation versus your swinging lever, so to speak. You do have to pull the trigger with the Glock. You can pull the trigger with the Smith & Wesson, but you don't have to. So they do it a little bit differently, but both of them are very easy to disassemble. So no leg up one way or the other there. So let's take a look for just a moment or two at the slides. The Gen 5 now comes with an NDLC coating, so they say it's a little bit harder. It's like a diamond-like coating. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but this seems to have held up reasonably well so far. It does definitely capture some fingerprints, and it's a little bit more slick than I would prefer, but so far it's been all right, and it's a little darker than previous generations. Now, it does have rear serrations, but not front serrations. As you guys probably know, there was an edition that came out earlier in 2017, a Gen 4, that had front serrations. Admittedly, I would have liked them to have carried that forward with the Gen 5. It's not a big deal. Most people don't care, but I thought it was a good addition to the Gen 4. So nitpicky, but I would have liked to have seen that. From a sight standpoint, now these obviously are not stock sights. As you know, Glocks come with polymer sights. Most people don't like those very much, and they typically switch them out. These are Trijicon HDs. I prefer these type of sights. They work well. I'm not a fan of the polymer sights because they have the potential to break under certain circumstances, especially if you have to do a one-handed manipulation or something like that. So I always ding Glock for having those polymer sights. Now, from a slide standpoint on the M&P, it's got an Armor Knight coating just like its other siblings, and so far it's been very robust. Now, some people have said that they can be prone to rusting. I haven't found that to be the case, but in the Midwest, we don't have as much of a problem with that. So I like this coating. Now, it does have the fish scale serrations on it. I really like these. I think they look good, and they are also very, very usable. Now, they carry those serrations on the front right there, although they're pretty subtle. You can do a press check with them, but that's about it. So I think they're more for aesthetic reasons, but still, I think it's a very good looking slide. In fact, I prefer the looks of the M&P over the Glock, just from a style standpoint. And then from a sight standpoint, once again, aftermarket Trijicon HD XRs, although out of the box with the Smith & Wesson, you do get some pretty decent steel sights. They're a 3-dot white setup, and out of the box, I think they're just a little bit nicer. Now, of course, again, I gravitate towards these. They're just a little bit easier for me to pick up, whether at the range or in any other situation. But again, I give the leg up to the Smith & Wesson from a sight standpoint out of the box. So that's it from a stats and a feature standpoint. Of course, we're going to come back and briefly take a look at the triggers. Again, I'll explain why here in just a moment. But let's take a look at a little bit of shooting and see how these guys do. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that footage at the range. So from a shooting perspective, I will say both of these guns are absolutely fantastic to shoot, especially if you like compact size striker-fired firearms. I mean, they really do a good job. Now, I've said before with the full-size M&P, I just don't connect with it quite as well for whatever reason, but the compact has really sort of hit that sweet spot, and then I've always had a good time with Glock 19. So both of these just really have done a great job. And again, I featured these or took these along with the CZP-10C and did some off-camera shooting with both of them over the course of several days, including the Apex triggers that you see in front of you. And it was a delight to shoot all three of them. So although that footage that you saw was stock footage, it is representative of what both of these are capable of without a question. Now, from a trigger perspective, I know that both of these had the aftermarket Apex triggers in them, but again, that puts them on a level playing field because the stock triggers on both of these are decent, but I think they both leave a little bit to be desired. So we won't focus too heavily on the triggers, of course, because it's not a video on the triggers, but if you're looking at aftermarket triggers and you're wondering about some of the different options here, well, here are some right here, both from Apex. We've got our flat face trigger right here on the Glock. This one's been around for quite some time, but this was newly developed for the Gen 5 because the internals are just a little bit different on the Gen 5 versus previous generations. But I like this trigger because first, it's totally flat and that safety lever disappears right into the face of the trigger. And then you've got just a little bit of uptake, reasonably smooth, up to your wall, and then a nice crisp break, and then your reset is right there. Very crisp, very audible. It's a great reset. Glocks have always had good resets, even on their stock triggers. So it's something I really enjoyed and look to be very consistent with Glocks. But once again, your uptake on this trigger, there's your break, and then your reset on that. So again, from a stock standpoint, Glocks just, they have pretty consistent triggers. They're nothing special, nothing to write home about, but they absolutely do the job. But it's always nice to be able to switch some things out if you have to. And more companies are starting to come out with aftermarket parts for the Gen 5, so we're starting to see some more options there. So from a trigger standpoint with the M&P 2.0, once again, this is the flat-E trigger from, or flat face trigger from Apex Tactical, and this has been a real showstopper. I mean, this has been probably one of my favorite triggers on the market. It did not influence this video by any stretch of the imagination because both of these are aftermarket. However, just from a functionality standpoint, it helped because the M&P has that hinged trigger, which I'm not as much of a fan of, largely because it breaks right at the very end of the grip housing or right at the beginning of the frame here, versus the Apex that breaks a little bit further out. So once again, that safety lever right there just disappears into the face of the trigger, and you've got a little bit of uptake, but it's extremely smooth. Another criticism I have of M&Ps, the take-up on M&Ps typically are a little bit rough, a little bit sandy or gravelly, or at least the ones that I have found. So this definitely smooths everything out, and you've got a nice defined wall. And then a break, not quite as audible, although audible doesn't really matter in the long term, but not as audible, but it's very crisp. And again, that trigger breaks a little bit further away from the end of the trigger housing, which is really nice. And then our reset is right there, and then we're back out to the start. Again, the reset not as audible, but very tactile. The M&P 2.0 series did a better job with their triggers, even out of the box. They still aren't perfect in my opinion, but definitely better. So once again, we've got our uptake very smooth, and then our wall. There's our break, and there is the reset and back out to the start. So again, both aftermarket triggers, but I consider this apples to apples because both are aftermarket and both are great options. And again, I believe that the stock triggers on either one left just a little bit to be desired. So what do I think of these guns overall? Once again, like I said in the beginning, both of these guns are fantastic. I've been a huge fan of the Glock 19 for many years, probably about 15 years now. And I've had Gen 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s. Never had a Gen 1, admittedly, but still have had a pretty good feel for how Glock 19s run in general. And the Gen 5 is really no different, although it was not as impressive from a market standpoint and people were a little bit let down by their enhancements. I found it to be fine. It doesn't bother me one way or the other. I do tend to gravitate towards the Gen 4. I just prefer those a little bit. But the Gen 5 has been just fine, and they're very easy shooters. I mean, this is definitely a great way to get people into shooting. I mean, I consider Glock 19s kind of like the Honda Civic of guns, but they're flat shooters. They're just easy to shoot, easy to acquire, especially when you have some aftermarket sights like these, and it just runs really well. So the Glock 19 has absolutely done a good job. It's been a lot of fun to shoot. That said, the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Compact has sort of taken me a little bit by surprise and kind of by storm, and I feel like a lot of people out there as well. Smith & Wesson did a really good job of coming out with a compact. It was long overdue, admittedly, but it was really exciting when they finally did that to give a true direct competitor to the Glock 19, and people have been very excited with this. Now, a lot of people have found with Smith & Wessons, and this has been the case with version 1 or version 2, that although they are good guns, they're soft shooting guns, and with the increased texture, it really helps. There were definitely a couple of things that were left wanting by some people, one of which being the trigger, and so having some aftermarket parts available for the M&P 2.0 Compact or its bigger brother are absolutely fantastic. So definitely some good aftermarket support really for both firearms at this point in time. And then upgrading those sights is something that I definitely wanted to do, although out of the box, the stock sights really aren't bad. But overall, the M&P 2.0 Compact has really surprised me, and it's really just been a lot of fun to take to the range, and both of these guns feel really good when shooting. So at the end of the day, if I could only have one, and it's always difficult to do this, but if I could only have one, I will admit I would take the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Compact. It's been a great gun, and I look forward to a really bright future with it. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this. Be sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know if you agree or disagree, or if there's some other guns you would have thrown in the mix with this type of comparison. I'm always looking forward to that. Once again, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it, and I will see you next time.